Hey, everybody. Welcome to Undivided Live. I'm Lindsay Crane, and I head the content and community teams here at Undivided. And today we are talking about in-home supportive services, or IHSS, for individuals under 18 years old. And as you may know, IHSS can be a crucial program for families raising kids with disabilities, providing the specialized childcare our kids need right at home. It's a lifeline for many families across California as it can support individuals throughout their lifespan, but it can also be overwhelming and confusing for parents to navigate, like so many of these systems in which we operate. And on a daily basis, we receive questions about eligibility, how hours are calculated, if young kids can qualify, how to demonstrate the need for more services. And lately, we've had tons of questions about the paid career pathway trainings. But more on that in a minute. We want every eligible family to understand what IHSS can offer, how they can access these vital supports, and what to do when they disagree. So with us today to help us answer all of these questions and more, we welcome back Undivided Public Benefits Specialist, Lisa Concoff Kronbeck. Lisa counsels families about government programs that support our kids and families, like Medi-Cal, Regional Center, CCS, and our focus for today, IHSS. She's also the mom of a kiddo with Down syndrome and is herself an individual with disabilities. She also actually loves talking about IHSS, which makes her even more beautifully unique because for many of us, me, just makes us see red. So hello, Lisa, welcome back. Always good to have you here.
Hi, thank you.
And also with you today in the chat, we have our community manager, Donna, and our lead navigator, Kelly. Donna will be passing along your questions to us, so please throw them into the chat. She'll also be sharing article links throughout our talk so you can read more about what we're discussing. And for our member families, we break down information even further. They have access to step-by-step guides on everything related to IHSS, from the application process to prepping for your annual visit to applying for protective supervision and everything in between. And even better, you have your own navigator to walk through every step with you. Plus, as I just mentioned, one of the biggest demands we're seeing right now are questions around the IHSS Career Pathways classes. So we're building a specialized support program to help guide our families through what can sometimes feel like a bit of a maze. So in case you're not familiar, the Pathways classes will continue to be offered through 2024 as paid training opportunities over the next year. They're open to any IHSS provider, and yes, that includes parent providers. You can get paid for attending classes that grow your knowledge about caring for your child or other individuals who may need support or home care. So we work with families who've made several $1,000s in addition to all the knowledge they've accumulated. So we don't want you to miss out on this opportunity. But as many of us have learned, it's unfortunately not always as easy as, just finding a list of classes, clicking and signing up whenever you want. Lisa's smiling because she knows this very well. We're going to address the trainings near the end of our chat with Lisa. Plus, we'll let you know how Undivided can support you with what can be a somewhat tricky process. So let's jump right in about all things IHSS. So Lisa, for those who are not yet in the program, what is IHSS?
So IHSS is in-home supportive services. It's a Medi-Cal service designed to help elderly people and people with disabilities to stay safely in their homes by providing funding for home care for tasks that the consumer would usually be able to do on their own. And their inability to do that is potentially jeopardizing their risk of remaining at home instead of being institutionalized. IHSS specifically is not, sometimes we hear, oh, you're just being paid to stay home and take care of your kids. That is not what IHSS is. What's happening is some of our children with disabilities are eligible under the IHSS regulations to qualify for home caregiving. And IHSS allows parents to be paid as that care provider in certain circumstances, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Got it. And who is eligible for IHSS and who isn't?
Okay, so you have to be a California resident receiving Medi-Cal. You have to be elderly or have a disability. You need to live at home, so not in a nursing facility, not in a hospital, not in a group community care facility. You need to be at risk of out-of-home placement without the services. So I was talking about before, like you can't dress, you can't bathe yourself, you're at risk of being put in an institution because of that lack of self-care ability. And yeah, those are the main criteria.
And I know that's scary language. So if I'm sure we have some parents on here who haven't yet entered into IHSS, we know that's scary language, but Lisa is talking about the legal language that surrounds IHSS. But one common misconception to clear up, Lisa, and I actually, just heard this yesterday, but is IHSS income based?
So IHSS is a Medi-Cal program. So to the extent that Medi-Cal is income-based, IHSS is income-based because of that. But there are several Medi-Cal programs that allow people with disabilities to access Medi-Cal regardless of income that might be deemed to them from other people. So in that regard, it is not specifically income-based separately from Medi-Cal.
And like I said, we're constantly hearing the wrong information about this coming from, some even well-meaning providers who are maybe telling some of their clients that this is income based. So it is important to know, like Lisa said, only when you're taking account into Medi-Cal. But correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, right? Just to restate it, right, that your child's benefits are not affected by your income.
If you are on the Medi-Cal institutional deeming waiver, the question is IHSS income based? No, Medi-Cal can be income based, but Medi-Cal can also be given based on any one of the home and community based services waivers, and so those are not calculated in the same way.
And we just had a question from Crystal. She said they don't qualify if we don't have Medi-Cal. We have Kaiser.
No, if you have Kaiser, it depends on whether that's private or Medi-Cal Kaiser. Mm-hmm. They have to have Medi-Cal. It doesn't have to be their primary insurance. It can be secondary. A lot of our kids have private insurance through our work, and then their secondary insurance is Medi-Cal. That still counts as them having Medi-Cal.
Right. And is there an eligible age range?
No. It is. They will frequently tell you, call back when your child is a certain age. There is not an eligible age range. Everything is tied to what kind of care a parent would be expected to provide to a typically developing child of the same age. So to the extent that your child has extraordinary care needs that exceed that fall into the IHSS categories, they can't deny based just on age.
Right. And so to be very clear, if a social worker tells you that IHSS does not cover kids, that's incorrect. So as Lisa knows, again, like she said, a consistent thing that we hear from parents, especially parents with young kids, is that they could be told by a social worker, you have to take care of your child anyway. They can't take care of themselves, so they don't qualify for IHSS. So Lisa, if we hear that, how can we respond?
The response is, I understand. I would like to apply anyway. If my child is denied, they can send me a written notice of action. Because a lot of times what will happen is they'll try to deny you on the phone. And there is no such thing as a phone denial. What happens is if they deny you on the phone, they've prevented you from denying, and they've prevented you from establishing a date, an application date. They've prevented you from developing any appeal rights because you've never filed anything. So because your benefits, if your child does qualify, the benefits are retroactive to the date that you apply. But if you never apply and you just call and they say, sorry, we don't provide it to kids, and you say, oh, okay, I'll call back in a few years, and you hang up, that's it. So they may well tell you, oh, we don't accept children under 5. We don't accept children under 10. I've heard all sorts of different ages as like what we don't accept. I understand that my child may be denied. I would like to apply anyway. Thank you so much.
Right. Got it. And another frequent question we hear, as IHSS stands for in-home supportive services, do all IHSS hours have to be fulfilled in the home?
So that's a tricky question. Basically, they're going to assign the hours. They're going to assess the need for hours and calculate hours based on the hours that would be needed at home. They are not going to come back and walk around with you and say, well, you changed the child's diaper at the grocery store, or you changed the diaper at grandma's house, so we're not going to count that. What they are going to count against you is any of those diaper changes or G-tube feeds, anything that somebody else does. So your hours are based on what's happening at home, but your child is not under house arrest. They have to be allowed to leave the house and enter the community. So if you take child to grandma's house that day and you change their diaper there, that's not going to change your diapering hours. What you are not going to get is additional hours to take the child to grandma's house for a social visit. So when they say IHSS is not for social visits and not for like protective supervision, they're not going to give you additional time to go on excursions. But if you're changing your diaper, if you're changing your child's diaper here or there, they can't force you to stay at home forever. Um, but if your child gets their diaper changed X number of times a day, but 3 of them happen at school, they will take that out because the school is providing that service on weekdays, and the school is providing, say, 1 G-tube feed a day. So they will deduct from that.
Got it. And what about therapeutic appointments like speech or OT?
So those are calculated separately.
Mhm.
There's a category of services called accompaniment and wait time. The pet, sometimes they'll tell you, oh, you have to take your child to appointments anyway, but there is an all county letter that talks about this. Parents can get accompaniment and wait time for appointments if, number one, the appointment is directly related to the child's disability, and two, the parent has to perform an IHSS approved task on the way, during the appointment, or on the way home. So whether that's transfer, whether that's diaper changing, G-tube feeding, if you have to be available during the visit, then you can also get wait time. And so what they're going to tell you is if you can drop your child off and say, okay, see you in an hour, or I'll pick them up, they're not going to give you wait time for that, because you have a designated out, you have a designated drop-off point and a designated pickup point, and you're allowed to attend to your own tasks in between. So if you get to drop them off and leave, then you'll get accompaniment, like transit time, but you won't get wait time. But if you have to be on call and available in case your child needs one of those IHSS services, like a diaper change, like a G-tube feed, something like that, then you'll get wait time as well. And there is an all county letter that I believe is going to be shared in the chat, that I've had to share in the past, because I was told, you're a parent, you have to take your child to doctor's appointments. Okay, but this is what the state says about this issue for parents and children with disabilities.
Got it. And what about, unfortunately, this can be frequent for our families. What if your child is admitted to the hospital?
Okay, if your child is admitted to the hospital, you can bill for the hours up until the time that your child was admitted. You can bill from the hour on the day they came home. You can bill from the time they were discharged for the rest of the day because they were at home. You absolutely cannot bill any time for a day that they were in the hospital for 24 hours. And I know that this can be really frustrating for parents of kids with disabilities, because we all know that we are next to our children's side the entire time. We're the ones often doing the diaper changes and the G-tube feeds, even if they're in the hospital. But that's the rule. You cannot, while the hospital has responsibility for your child, you cannot bill IHSS time.
Okay. And what about on the opposite end, the fun things? What about vacations?
So this is another area where things are kind of murky. There are eligibility issues that come up if you're out. You absolutely cannot bill for being out of the country. If you're out of the country, you cannot bill IHSS time. If you're within the country but out of state, you are supposed to clear it with the caseworker first.
And that's even if it's like you're gone for 2 days.
So this is where it gets murky. Like they don't really have specific guidance on, you're not supposed to be out of the state for more than 30 days, or else that can mess with your eligibility, with your residency. There's issues, but what I can tell you is you are supposed to let your caseworker know if you're going to be out of state for any like meaningful period of time, and you're supposed to get pre-approved to get the hours. I can tell you that there are parents who have done that and not been approved. I can tell you that there are parents who have done that and been approved. I can tell you there are parents who have not notified them and had not had a problem. And I can tell you that there are parents who have not notified them and have had a problem. So like that's about what I can say on that, is that you are supposed to let them know, and they are supposed to authorize it if you're traveling with the child and providing those services in a home setting.
Got it.
But you see how it gets messy.
Right. And I know we've known multiple parents who have had, gotten that letter saying, hey, we're going to be there in, 2 days. And they didn't get the
Mm-hmm.
letter because they
Because
were
they were
out
out
of
of town.
town. And then that can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, and for parents who are interested in being the parent provider, which we've kind of been touching on, but who is eligible for this?
Okay, so in a two-parent household, um, one parent has to be working full-time, disabled, in school full-time, or otherwise completely unavailable to provide hours. And the non-working parent has to be unable to get full-time employment because of their child's extraordinary needs. In a one-parent household, it means that the parent is unable to get full-time employment because of the parent's extraordinary needs, for the parent to be the paid as the provider. Full-time is the lower of an average of 40 hours a week or designated full-time by your employer. So if your employer says 36 hours is full-time, then that's full-time. If they, I've heard a lot of like nurses that'll come up where like they'll work a certain number of days per week and that's considered full-time.
Yep.
That's if you're considered full-time by your work, then you're considered full-time. And then you would not be able to be paid as your child's provider.
And I think you wanted Donna to share a letter in the chat as well, Lisa. I didn't know
Oh
if you.
yeah, that kind of goes over when parents are eligible to be the parent provider.
Yeah. So if you have any other questions about that, that letter will go into more depth if there's specifics that you want to check
Yeah,
out.
all county letters are actually really helpful.
Mhm.
They give guidance to all the counties about specific questions that have come up over and over again. When that happens, they submit an all county. They write a letter to the directors of every county's Department of Social Services and explain exactly what the rule or regulation is. And those are documented on the California on CDSS's website, the Department of Social Services. You can look at like a list of all county letters and get guidance. And those are some of the ones that we're posting in the chat here.
And what about and we had a couple questions that came in with RSVPs before the event about this. Can a parent be a caregiver if to two children if they both qualify for IHSS?
So the answer is yes. But if the children have combined hours of more than 66 hours a week, because that's if you have one client, your maximum hours are your maximum weekly hours are the total monthly hours divided by 4. But if you have two clients or more, your max hours are 66 hours a week. So the only way to go over that is by applying for an exemption. Now, exemption 1, their child had to have been receiving IHSS before 2016. So the main exemption is exemption 2, where basically you have extraordinary circumstances and either the child has a complex medical or behavioral need and the service, the IHSS, has to be provided by someone who lives with them, or you live in a part of the state where you just can't there are just no providers available, or you can't find a provider that is able to communicate to the recipient in the same language. So those are the criteria for getting exemption 2. And if you get exemption 2, then you can work up to 360 hours a week, a month, up to 3. So I think it comes out to like 90 hours a week. And that will allow you to work additional hours. But if it goes beyond that, you have to hire an outside provider. And that can get tricky because if the argument is you can't hire an outside provider, then how do you hire an outside provider?
Right, exactly. And I think Donna was going to share a link about the
Yeah.
exemptions again that
Mm-hmm.
go into more detail as well, so you can check that out. And so, Lisa, can a parent work half of their child's hours and have an outside provider work the other half?
Okay. If a parent is eligible to be paid as the provider, then they can hire an outside provider only when there is no available parent. So if the parent works part-time, or if the parent is in school part-time, or if the parent has an illness and is unable to provide services, or if the parent is hospitalized and is unable to provide services, or has COVID and all of those. I mean, during the pandemic, that was a whole other thing with the COVID hours. But if the parent is unable to provide hours for any of those reasons, they can hire an outside provider only during those times. But they can't they can't hire an outside provider for respite.
Right.
Like if they're at home and able to provide services, then they're the one that's on call.
Right. Okay. And for those, I mean, I know parents on this call again who haven't yet applied, or maybe they're in the process, but for those applying for the first time, what are 3 things that parents need to know about their initial application?
Okay. So the first one I already said, which is there is no such thing as denial by phone. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. If you didn't get a form, if it's not in writing that you applied, they may not have put in the application. So if you apply, you don't hear anything for a few weeks, you should call and make sure that they got your application. Because with all these benefits, it's like if it's not in writing, it didn't happen, basically. So that's 1. 2, benefits are retroactive from the date of application. So make sure that you write down what day you called and requested that they take your information. And number 3, a diagnosis does not automatically mean approval for IHSS. I see a lot of people post in some of the Facebook, like social media groups, like, oh, my child just got diagnosed with XYZ. How many hours can I get for IHSS? And that is really not how it works. Every child is assessed based on their individual needs, and the hours will be awarded based on that particular child and not based on their diagnosis. So that's really important to know.
Yeah. And I did want to really reiterate the second thing that you said, that benefits are retroactive from the date of application. And Lisa keeps really stressing that, you can't be denied on the phone, because you need to be able to log, right? Follow up has to be in writing that you applied, because as things can take a while, which, is going to be my next question, but sometimes things can take a while. So, if it takes months, which, it has been known, like even up to 10 months sometimes for things to really get going, guess what though? You're going to get paid from that first phone call you made. If your child's accepted into IHSS, you're going to get retroactive pay for whatever hours were awarded from the date of application, right? Right, Lisa? Right. So that's like 10 months of getting paid that, so if you're kind of putting off calling or thinking, this is, am I ready to do this? It is important. Like from once you start, you can't get that retroactive pay.
Yeah. And there's another thing that sometimes comes up is that if you've been a longtime Medi-Cal recipient, there are some circumstances where if you've already been providing all these services and you can show that the child qualified, you can sometimes go even 90 days retroactive to the date of application. And sometimes that'll get a little bit confused. Like the caseworker will get confused and tell you, oh, you can only get 90 days of retroactive benefits. And this will be like after 10 months and they'll be trying to tell you you're only going to get 90 days. And they're confusing the 90 days prior to the date of application with the 90 days of retro benefits from the date that you apply. So if that comes up, like reach out to us, but just I've seen it happen. So
got it. And like I said, I know this is your favorite question, but how long does the process, or can the process, take from initial application to formal decision?
It varies. There's no set amount. They have statutory requirements, like after which they're supposed to respond to your request for application. Like you should have heard from them within 30 days and gotten the medical, like the health certification in, and they should have scheduled somebody to come out to your home. But as with many things, there are frequent delays. They're notorious for misplacing papers, or they never got it, and they're not going to let you know they didn't get it. They're just going to deny. So it is not supposed to take that long, but it will take months. And it also depends on whether or not you have to appeal. Because if you have to appeal, then you potentially have a conditional withdrawal, and then you potentially have a hearing. And it's really difficult to say because there are so many variables involved.
And we will touch on appeals later if
Yeah.
unfortunately, if you find yourself in that boat. And Yesenia did have a follow-up question about the exemptions. She said, can both parents be providers when exemption 2 was denied so that all hours are used?
If both parents meet the criteria, so if the parent is initially unavailable and then the first parent is doing all of the hours, and then another, so that it's already been qualified to do all the hours, and then the other child has a need, and then the other parent has to quit their full-time job in order to take care of the other child's needs, because the first parent, once they're doing the maximum number of hours per week, is now considered unavailable, then yes, there are situations where that has happened, but you have to show that both parents meet the criteria of in order to be parent providers.
Got it.
But
And
yes, there are situations where that is happening when a household has multiple children who have extraordinary needs that both parents are providing.
and Anna also had a question. Can my child get IHSS if they go to a special needs daycare during the day? How do the hours work for something like that, especially for a parent that works or goes to school part-time?
Okay, so typically what will happen, and it really depends on what your child's specific needs are. I mean, we can get into this a little bit when we talk about protective supervision, but anytime you have services that are being provided by somebody else, that is going to get deducted from your total weekly hours. But the way that it works if you have protective supervision is that they don't actually pay for 24 hours a day. They pay for 195 hours per month max for protective supervision. So what they're going to do when they calculate your hours is they're going to say the need for protective supervision is 168 hours a week, because that's how many hours there are in a week. And then if your child is in school 30 hours a week, that's going to get deducted out of the 168, but it's not really going to get deducted out of your time, because that you can only get like 45 hours a week of protective supervision because of the way that the math breaks down. Do you know what I mean? So, but if your child has diapering at school, or if your child has G-tube feeds at school, they will deduct a small amount out of that if the child gets fed a certain amount of times at school, or gets diapered a certain amount of times at school. They will take out of that. It doesn't, so it may be like a small deduction, but for protective supervision, it sounds like a lot because it sounds like a big chunk of time, but it's not actually making that much of a difference on your notice of action, if any at all.
So this is probably a good time. Like let's review the available services. I mean, you've been touching on some of them, Lisa, and if you could give some examples of each.
Okay, so we have non-medical personal care services. That is basically the activities of daily living, the ADLs. It's dressing, bathing, ambulation, feeding, toileting, those general self-care things that the ADLs, activities of daily living. Then there's related services, and for children, you generally need to show extraordinary need for these. Those include laundry, grocery shopping and errands, and meal prep. You're generally not going to get grocery shopping and errands for a child. Laundry, you can make a case for extraordinary need if your child, for example, has an ostomy or a toileting issue, or G-tube feeds where like there might be more laundry than usual because of their medical needs. And meal prep and cleanup is also an area where there might be paramedical needs involved. But otherwise, for younger children, parents usually cook their meals anyway, so you don't get a lot of time for that. And we're going to look at the chart in a minute that shows the ages for each of these things. Then there's, as we discussed, accompaniment and wait time for medical appointments, paramedical services, which we will discuss, and protective supervision, which we will also discuss.
Right. And so the parameters within each of these examples are really important, because we have to be able to have, set expectations, and so we can properly prepare for our visit, which, if we're taking log and hours, which we'll talk about. But for example, bowel and bladder care, can you give us an example of what is or isn't allowed?
Can we actually bring up the functional index scale early so that it can be up while I'm talking about this? Okay. So basically, when they ask you about what your child's needs are, you're not going to be asked to rank your child's needs. But when you describe what your child needs, they will rank your child's needs. And typically, a rank where you see on this chart everywhere where it says 1, usually a 1 means that the client can do that for themselves. For a child, a 1 means that either the client can do it for themselves, or the parent would usually be expected to provide this service anyway. So you can see that, like, you're not going to get shopping and errands until the child is 17. They're very generous with laundry. They don't expect them to do their laundry until they're 14, and housework until they're adult. Don't tell your kids this, right?
I was
um,
going to say, my mom did not live by these rules.
but this is how they gauge what counts as a service that the parent would be expected to provide to a typically developing child of the same age. So if you look, for example, at bowel and bladder care, a 1 means parents are going to be doing that anyway. A 6 means that it's a paramedical service. And we're going to talk about paramedical services in a minute. But you see that for toileting, once the child is 4, then they're going to rank it on a scale of 1 to 6, which is 1 to 5 means, from anywhere from total independence to a little bit of assistance verbally to hand over hand to total reliance on someone else to do the task. And then 6 means it's a paramedical service. For a baby, a 6 is going to mean something like they have an ostomy bag or they have catheterization, that where the toileting itself becomes a paramedical service and not just changing diapers. And it's the same for feeding, where it's a 1 or a 6, meaning one is the parent. I don't know why they expect a 7-year-old child for their parent to feed them, but a 6 is going to be a child with a G tube. So if your baby, if your 6-month-old has a feeding tube, has a G tube or a GJ or a J tube or anything, that's going to count as a paramedical service. They can't tell you, oh, parents usually have to do that for their child, because no, they don't. That's a paramedical service. And if you look at dressing, it's a 1 up until they're 5 years old, and then it's a 1 to a 5. So that once they're 5, then they're going to start basing it on how much help the child actually needs. And so this chart is really helpful in terms of if you've got a small child and you're trying to decide when to apply. Looking at this chart can really help you get a sense. And this is setting aside paramedical services and protective supervision. But looking at this chart can help you kind of decide, like, when you think would be the appropriate time to apply and how you think your child is going to qualify based on these criteria. And these numbers are based on a variety of adaptive skills assessments, and like the Vineland and some other tests that kind of gauge where kids are supposed to be developmentally at certain ages.
And so once we have this chart, we're figuring out, okay, yep, I do this, right? This is the level where we are. This is what,
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing anyway. I mean, Lisa, there's so much we do for our kids. So it's really hard to
Yeah.
break down and understand, right? And that chart is very helpful, but to really
Mm-hmm.
understand like what counts and what doesn't, once we really figure out, what is eligible under IHSS, should we keep a log of how long we're spending on any applicable category over the course of, say, a week?
I would especially keep logs of paramedical services, and a behavior log and an intervention log for protective supervision. For other things, they have set ranges based on whether the child needs more assistance or less assistance. They have a set amount of time that they give for each individual service. But if you think that your child probably takes longer than average to change, for example, if you have a 5-year-old who's in diapers, and you're going to get diapering time because the child is not supposed to still be in diapers at 5, according to models of what a typically developing child is, where they are developmentally. But your particular child has behavioral issues or physical issues that make diaper changing take longer than you would expect. a diaper changing to take for a 5-year-old who needs a diaper change, then you should log it. Because then you're saying, like, I understand that you have this set amount of time, but it actually takes more than this because of my child's behavioral needs, or because because of some physical needs that we have, it takes longer, or we have to change diapers more often.
Right. And
Um,
I think also a log can help parents because you're on autopilot. You're used to doing these things. And
mhm.
so if someone's sitting in front of you saying,
Yeah.
well, I mean, this is the amount, it's a small amount of time, or maybe you'd be doing this, for a child, the same age, then, if you have those logs, I mean, it can be eye-opening to a parent to really see how long time is spent. And so it can really help when you're sitting down talking about all of the many things that you're doing for your child to really put into perspective.
Yeah.
I think it can be surprising to some parents too.
Yeah, and the thing to remember is, especially like for paramedical services, especially, is to count the time from the minute you start to the minute you stop. Like, don't gather all the things together. Like, if you're preparing meds, right? Like,
Mhm.
don't get everything up in a line and get it all ready to go and then start the timer, because the amount of time, setup time, like that's part of it. Like, it takes
Yeah.
time to gather all the meds, to get all the syringes, to measure it out. Like, there's
Mhm.
more to it than just giving the meds, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, so include everything. It takes time to set up the G tube, like the pump and the formula and stuff. It doesn't just start when you put on the extension and hit the start on the pump. Like, there's more to it than that.
Right. Which actually is, a great point of like what are the five most important things that parents should prepare ahead of in-person evaluations or reassessments?
Okay. A log of behavioral interventions for protective supervision. And that is not only a log of all the times that your child has been injured, but all of the times that you have prevented your child from being injured. Because we all know that those are two very different numbers. And we know that they would look very different if you were not intervening. So make sure that you keep that log every time you've had to stop your child from accidentally hurting themselves. Number 2, copies of doctor's forms. Even if you've already submitted them, bring them again. And make sure you keep copies for yourself. Paramedical and protective supervision forms, if you've already been able to get them completed. You should be given those forms at the meeting, but it helps if you've already been able to have them done. A list of all the medications that your child is taking, if they're taking any medications. And don't understate your child's needs. Don't exaggerate, but don't understate. I know it gets very complicated talking about our child's needs, because when we talk about their deficits, we also want to talk about their strengths. And it's so hard to talk for some of us about what our children can't do. But it's really important that you be upfront about what your children can't do, and be willing to talk about their weaknesses and their deficits, because this is a particular time when it really matters. And to the extent that you talk about their skills, understand that they will take that at face value. Like, if you mention, I'm so proud because my child wrote their name after working with them for 6 months, my child is finally able to recognize their name. Caseworker might write, child can read. So, like, understand that what you're saying is being taken at face value.
Right.
And just be very, very straightforward about what your child is not able to do.
And one thing I know, I've heard over the years is to, as much as you don't want to go there. Sometimes, like, to think of your child on their worst day, right? Or, where that is, could be a typical day for you, and really
Yeah.
bring that to life and make sure that they understand, like, what that looks like, what that time is, and what that reality is.
Yeah, I mean, like, on a day when they're particularly bad, but not bad, but like misbehaving, or like difficult or challenging. That was a terrible word, bad. On a day
They're
where
having a
things
challenging day. They're
on a
having a
day where
really,
things are
yeah.
particularly difficult for you,
Mhm.
not necessarily like a day where they like a day that would be likely to happen again at any time. So it's like, there's some days where, like, something very specific and traumatic happened and things were very challenging. That's not the kind of day I would describe, but, like, just we've all had that day where it's just like, oh, what is going on? Like, why is my child not listening to me? Why is my child just not just doing all of the things? And that's the day you describe, because it's not like something positive. It's just like that day could come at any time. And that's the day that you never know when you're going to have it or not. And that's a good day to describe. Does that make sense?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, I'm muting because my dog is
I
barking in the background,
thought I heard a
Amazon. Yeah,
dog.
exactly. Amazon, arch
Yeah.
nemesis. Yes, that completely makes sense. And a lot of us,
Yeah.
that could be every day for a lot of us
And
whose children have problems, or who have challenges regulating. And so,
and it's not even just
it is
about
hard to talk
behaviors.
about, but
It's
this
not
is the
even just
place where
about
you
Yeah, it's
talk
not
about
even just about behaviors. If your child has
it. No.
medical issues, if your
Right.
child has G-tube issues, like
Hmm.
there's a day when the pump, it just will not stop beeping at you, and it's like, why is this happening? Why does this pump hate me?
Hmm.
And that's part of living and taking care of a child with a feeding pump
Exactly.
and a G-tube, is things go wrong with it,
Right.
and you can't predict it, and it things like that happen all the time. And
Right.
so describe the way things happen.
Right. Exactly. And what, on the other end of the spectrum, then what is one thing parents should not do before the in-person evaluation or reassessment?
I would say have your child there for the meeting. Make sure that they're there. They will expect you to keep them home from school. Some caseworkers are really flexible and they'll send you a time, but it's like, oh, the child's in school at that time. Oh, we can make it this day. Or they'll say, okay, well, we can just put your case on pause and stop your benefits until your child is available to meet with us. I've heard that too. So, be prepared for your child to have to stay home from school if they have to be there.
Yeah.
And do not give them your only copy of anything. Keep copies of everything, because things get lost all the time. These offices have thousands and thousands of consumers whose files are going in and out, and it is very common for things to get misplaced or for things to never make it into the file. So do not give them your only copy of anything, unless it's like they handed you a form and you fill it out and you hand it right back to them on the spot. Fine. But if you went and had your doctor sign a form, no, they don't get the only copy. You
Right.
have to make sure that you keep backups.
Absolutely. And something that, you've been mentioning throughout our whole talk, protective supervision, paramedical. So let's get into that. First, protective supervision. What is it and who qualifies?
Okay. Protective supervision is for people with severely impaired memory, judgment, and or orientation who require 24/7 supervision because they are likely to injure themselves or others due to their non-self-directing behavior. And non-self-directing means that they are unable to assess the danger and risk of harm before doing something. Self-directing can mean something different to different people. It can mean something different to doctors. It can mean something different to behaviorists. But for IHSS, self-direction means if someone is self-directing, it means that they are able to identify the risk of harm before acting and assess and determine, is this going to potentially hurt me, and then do it anyway.
Right.
Okay,
And oh, sorry,
go
sorry.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, well, and one of the biggest questions that can come around this are about aggressive behaviors. So, what about aggressive behaviors, either to oneself or to others, does that qualify for protective supervision?
So that's another word that has a very specific meaning with IHSS, where aggression means intentional self-directing lashing out at somebody else, or intentional self-directing harm. And that is another word that can be used differently by doctors or behaviorists especially will say aggressive behavior if the child just lashes out. But if they don't understand that they can hurt somebody by doing that, is it really aggression? And so those are words, aggression and self-harm, that you have to really think about when you use those. Think about what they mean, and think about what they mean to IHSS. And if that's not what's happening, if like somebody will say, oh, my child has aggressive hate behaviors, can I apply for protective supervision? My first question is, does the child know that he can hurt somebody by those behaviors? Is he trying to hurt somebody? Or is he just like having sensory input issues? Is he just like frustrated and lashing out and not understanding that he can hurt somebody? And if they say he doesn't understand that he can hurt someone, then I say they don't use the word aggression, because
Right.
IHSS will take that as self-direction.
Right. I mean, I know parents whose children have certain genetic conditions where
Mhm.
they need like really sort of extreme sensory input,
Right,
and that might be biting, that might be
right,
like grabbing, and it is
right.
the intent is not aggression. It's
Or
something that feels
self-harm.
good
Yeah,
since like sensory wise to
yeah,
them, and so it's important, like you said,
yeah,
even though somebody might see that as aggression, we
yeah.
can't describe it as that
Well,
because that,
self-harm, they don't usually classify self-harm. They differentiate between aggression and intentional self-harm or suicidal ideation or suicidal attempts. So they'll say like you can't get protective supervision in order to keep somebody under supervision for who's suicidal,
right.
right? So intentional self-harm they separate from aggression. But absolutely, if your child is not meaning to hurt themselves and just needs
Or
that
others,
input,
or
don't
others.
say this is intentional self-harm because it's not. That's not
Or
what it is.
or
For
others,
others.
right?
For
Don't,
others.
yeah, exactly. Don't call it aggression.
So just understand that words have meanings, especially with IHSS, and use them in that way.
Right. Be
Or don't if
intentional with
that's
your
not how they
language.
apply. hmm
Right.
Use your
And
language intentionally.
right, yeah. And intensive medical issues, right? That might pose a safety risk, for example, seizures. Are those also not protective supervision?
Okay, you cannot get protective supervision to watch for spontaneous medical emergencies. Seizures are one of those things. There have been some cases where a person would have seizures and then they would become cognitively impaired and potentially wander off. And there have been some cases like that where there was a basis for protective supervision, but you cannot, that's really specific case. Like you generally cannot get protective supervision to monitor for spontaneous medical emergencies. The one exception to that is if the medical emergency is being caused by the person's cognitive impact. So, for example, if a child has a port, or if they have a trach, if they have a G tube and they're constantly yanking at it or tripping over it or pulling it out because they don't understand what it is, they don't understand it's not a toy, they don't understand what will happen if they pull it out, and this is a life sustaining device, that can be a basis for protective supervision because the child doesn't understand the consequences of disrupting this life sustaining equipment that needs to stay connected to them. And the reason for them disconnecting it and potentially harming themselves is because they don't understand the consequences of their actions.
Right. And speaking about intentional language, also like thinking about how that translates into the paperwork, right? So, what
Mhm.
are the most important things to keep in mind when filling out the protective supervision paperwork?
So, like I said before, keep track of dangerous behavior, whether there's actual injury or not. Because if you have a child who needs protective supervision, you know that you are intervening to keep them safe multiple times per day, sometimes multiple times per hour. And they need to be aware of how much supervision they require in order to not get injured. Make sure that your child's doctor is aware of these behaviors and the energy that you put into keeping your child safe, because the doctor is the one who needs to fill out the forms, and you want it filled out by somebody who knows your child and knows their history and knows their limitations and cognitive impairments. And the other part is kind of what we talked about before, is using language that describes your child's behavior appropriately, and intentionally, and not using words that have kind of colloquial meanings that have different meanings to IHSS and could potentially jeopardize your child's ability to get the support that they need.
Right. And similarly to how we talked about the logs, so you have that information, right, that you're putting together yourself. Do we need to gather supporting paperwork from doctors or providers, therapists that are working with our kids, maybe our child's school? Do we need to gather that to submit with the paperwork?
It's not a bad idea. The most important forms are the ones from the doctors, because your IHSS is very much focused on what happens in the home. And so, if they're talking about how the child elopes at school, sometimes they'll take that into consideration. And sometimes they'll say, we don't really care what happens at school because that's not about them being able to live at home. So the most important documentation is what's documenting what happens at home, and the documentation from the doctors about their diagnoses and their clinical limitations. Where this becomes especially important, I kind of say sort of the more, like, the less readily apparent your child's disability is to the caseworker, the more you're going to have to provide documentation to substantiate your child's disability. Because when they come into your house, um, you know, and I don't want to talk badly about caseworkers, because some of them are absolutely lovely, and some of them are very, very jaded. And there's no way of telling who the caseworker is going to be. And like I said, some of them are absolutely lovely and they care about our kids and they want to keep them safe. And some of them are just like, why are you being paid to take care of your child? And so if they come into your house, I've heard horror stories about, like, the caseworker looks at the child and says, that child doesn't look disabled. Hey, child, what's your name? They say their name. This child's not disabled. He knows his name. Like, it's so arbitrary and based on the caseworker's observation of your child in that moment. And it depends on how long they stay. It depends on how meaningful their interaction is with the child. And so the if you know 100% that the caseworker is going to come in and see your child and be able to understand, like, how clearly this child needs interventions and support, that's one thing. But if you suspect that the caseworker is not going to really understand your child by interacting with them for a short period of time, that's when having more documentation can be really helpful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm sure it makes sense to a lot of these families. Probably, parents run into all kinds of things, especially when trying to get benefits, IEP. I mean, and the kids where might present in a different way that isn't obvious or isn't what that caseworker is thinking means
Yeah.
IHSS, then that can be really difficult. So I'm sure for families listening are like, yep, that's my kid.
Yeah, and some kids have a social script memorized where you can
Right.
ask them, "What's your
Yeah.
name? My name is X. How old are you? My name is Y." And they're like, "Oh, this child knows." But you could ask them any question, and their answer is going to be their name, and the next question is going to be their age, because they have a script memorized, because that's what people always ask them. So it's just, it's not, and these are not clinical social workers. Like, they're not trained, they're not always trained to really be able to identify a child's disabilities from a short interaction.
Right. And something else just to keep in mind, your initial visit where they're assessing if you're going to get any hours, that probably will be a different caseworker than if you're approved for IHSS hours that then becomes your regular caseworker. So
Frequently.
if
Yeah.
it's a bad experience, don't get discouraged.
Yeah.
It should be a different person that
Hmm.
would be assigned to you. And what about age range? Because again, there's a lot of misconceptions, Lisa. So is there an age range where protective supervision kicks in?
No. A child cannot be denied protective supervision on the basis of their age, and Donna will share an all county letter that says as much. However, you have to be able to demonstrate why your child needs more supervision than a typically developing child of the same age. And when a child is 6 or 7, that's a little bit easier to establish. If a child is 2, you need to be able to demonstrate why your child needs more close supervision than a typically developing 2-year-old. And so it's not impossible. There are children who need that close supervision, but you better be prepared to document it and substantiate that claim, because otherwise they're going to say, well, all 2-year-olds need supervision.
Right.
And this is where this is not limited to situations where you've got kids with medical devices, but this is certainly an area where kids who have medical devices that they're playing with and removing because they don't understand, that will separate a child who needs protective supervision from a typically developing 2-year-old. Because a typical, or even a 1-year-old, like, if they're not mobile, for example, you have to be able to demonstrate how they can hurt themselves if they're not ambulatory. But if they have an IV port, if they have G-tube, if they have oxygen, a trach, and they can really seriously hurt themselves by removing those things, even if they're not ambulatory, then there's your answer for how they can hurt themselves without walking.
Right.
And
Right.
that can come up with young children too.
And once your child is granted protective supervision, do they automatically qualify every year
No,
thereafter?
no. They may not ask you to renew it every single year, but they usually will every couple of years. And they'll let you know when they send you the notification that you have of your annual visit. They will include a new copy of the paramedical services form, and it will be checked on the form that you need to have an updated one filed.
Protective supervision, not paramedic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
protective supervision. Sorry,
I
PS,
know. All the P's, all the P's.
They're both PS.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is true of protective supervision and paramedical services. That if you
Right.
need them updated, they will notify you ahead of time
Right.
that you need those updated.
But it is important to know if you're thinking like, why are they asking? Like, I mean, it's hard. It's like, well, my child is still disabled, right? But just know that
Mm-hmm.
that is an expectation. Every couple of years, they might ask for updated paperwork. So don't be surprised.
Yeah.
And paramedical also. So just for those that don't know, can you tell us what is paramedical and who qualifies?
Paramedical services are services that the person would ordinarily be able to do for themselves, but that are ordered by and directed by a physician or other medical provider. So to checking blood sugar, doing anything so it's not administering over the counter medication, but like if the doctor has to tell you how often to give this, if it requires additional judgment, like if the doctor says, do this, and if this, then give this dose, if this, then give this dose, then you're talking about paramedical services. So there's all sorts of I'm just trying to see if I can there's so many different services that it can be. You've got catheterization, dealing with ostomy bags, G tubes, injections, anything where something is like puncturing the skin or going in through a stoma in the body. If you have to do enemas, if you have to monitor vital signs, if you have to check blood sugar. And this is where kind of the issue of monitoring for medical emergencies which you can't get, can sometimes bleed into paramedical services, which you can get, which is that if a person is not able to communicate their symptoms, you might have to monitor them for certain things more frequently. For example, blood sugar. If they can't tell you, I feel a little lightheaded, if they can't tell you how they're feeling, the doctor might tell you that you need to monitor them more times per day than somebody who could actually communicate their feeling, and then it would be based on that. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have to monitor something or take a certain vital sign more often in the day because of the child's inability to communicate symptoms, then that would go into the paramedical services.
Right. And so all these things taken into consideration, whether you have protective supervision, paramedical, or you have the other available services, what is the range of hours that a client under 18 can receive?
This is my favorite question.
Oh yeah, this is it. This one.
It is literally 0 to 283.
Right.
There is absolutely no way to predict. This is what I see a lot online, or people ask me like, my child has X, how many hours can I get? I don't know. Let's talk about your child. Let's go over the chart. Like, what is your child able to do? It's so particularly tailored to the child that there's no way to predict how many hours they're going to get. If you know 100% they guarantee qualify for protective supervision, I mean, they could even be denied, and you might still have to appeal. Even if it's like so obvious, like you may still have to go to hearing. If a child needs protective supervision, that will add 195 hours to their monthly hours. So their hours will be 195 plus whatever personal care hours and related services and accompaniment they need. The maximum hours is 283. So if you have a child who has extensive needs, that's 283 is the max for IHSS. There may be other services, but that's a whole other webinar. But it's 0 to 283. the 283 is the maximum, and the only people who are going to get 283 hours are people who are considered severely impaired. If you're non-severely impaired, it means you need less than 20 hours a week of personal care services. If you're severely impaired, it means that you need 20 hours or more of personal care services, and then the max hours becomes 283.
Right. And I'm looking, I think Tosha asked a question about protective supervision. Do we have to specifically request for protective supervision in addition to IHSS hours already in place when they schedule renewal? Do they typically attempt to decrease already previously approved hours when you're requesting an additional service?
Typical is such a hard word with them because, it's, again, like it totally depends on the caseworker. It depends on your child. It depends on how the meeting goes. If your child has a certain number of hours, and then and at the next meeting you ask for protective supervision, that should not have any impact on the other hours. You're just asking for an additional service. That I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but like, if if you already have protective supervision, you should not have to ask for it again at the next meeting. It's considered part of your child's hours, and they're still IHSS hours.
I
Protective
don't think she
supervision
has
is
it
IHSS
yet,
hours.
Lisa, just to say, because
Okay.
I think there's already hours in place.
Okay.
So I think she said, do we specifically have to request for protective supervision in addition to the hours already in place
Yeah,
when
if
they
you don't
schedule a
ask,
renewal? Do you wait until they show up? Do you let
you
them
don't
know
have
ahead
to
of
wait for the annual renewal. You can request it ahead of time. You can ask for a reassessment if your child's circumstances have changed. Sometimes they'll say that they're only allowed to increase hours up to a certain point in between annual visits. But if your child's circumstances have changed and they now need protective supervision, you can request that. If you don't request it, you are not going to get it. In theory, they are supposed to give you information about protective supervision if your child has any cognitive delays. They're supposed to automatically give you that information if your child has developmental disabilities. That does not always happen. So if you don't ask for protective supervision and they don't give you the form and you never submit the form, it's never going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's as a follow-up question to that. Um, we should reiterate also that hours can change from year to year,
Yes.
just because you have protective supervision doesn't automatically mean that you have it forever,
Yeah.
right? Same with
Mm-hmm.
hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you should know that anytime you ask for a reassessment, like they can move your hours up or down. Like if they reassess and they're like, oh, well, the child can do this now, they could put your hours down as well. But as your child gets older, if the gap between your child's skills and those of a typically developing child of the same age are growing, then the hours should be going up, not down.
Right, right. Well, and as hours can change, so can pay rate. So some good news, right? IHSS workers were supposed to be receiving a raise in January, correct?
Yes. So when I started providing, back in the day, when I started providing IHSS hours, the rate was like 9 something per hour. There have been tremendous efforts at getting toward a living wage for in-home care providers, for getting overtime, and there are additional pay rates coming up, increases. So the pay rate is different from county to county, and so a lot of the negotiation has been about making sure that it is tied to a certain amount, either tied to the state minimum wage or tied to being a certain amount above the minimum wage. So as the minimum wage goes up, then the IHSS providers rates go up too. So Donna's going to share a link in the chat to the county rate, the hourly rate per county. This is usually updated a few months before, or like a few days before the new month. And so this is always kept up to date, but it's only up to date like as of like right now. So I think the what's up right now is like hours as of December 1st, but like mid to late December, it should come up hours as of January 1st, and you'll see those changes. Some counties are going up 20, like to 50 cents or 75 cents. Some counties have an incremental rate increase where there will be a small increase in January and then another small increase in July. But you can expect that across the board, most of the counties will increase over the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And
So
a lot of them will go into effect this January 1st, and there will just be continual increases.
Yep. So keep checking that link, like Lisa said, even if it's just a couple days before, so you can see
Yeah.
what you would be.
And you may all be I mean, the thing is, like, you may be able to find out now based on your county's website, or your county's union, or your county's public authority might have that information already available. But there's so many different counties in California, and everyone has a different rate.
Right. Okay. So we've earlier had some questions about appeal. So what happens if we're denied either after the initial evaluation, or they try and terminate or reduce hours after a reassessment? What can we do?
So appeal within 10 days in writing and request aid paid pending appeal, which means that your hours stay where they are until you are finished with the appeal process. You can still appeal after 10 days, but then you won't have aid paid pending appeal. And you want to keep those hours in place while you are in the appeal process. The most likely thing to happen is that they will offer a reassessment in exchange for a conditional withdrawal of your appeal. And what that means is that you conditionally withdraw your appeal, and they'll come and do a reassessment. And if you agree with the reassessment, then you completely drop the appeal. And if you disagree with the reassessment, then you reopen that appeal. So before you sign anything about a conditional withdrawal, make sure that you see in writing that it says that if you disagree, that your appeal goes back to the original date that you appealed, and not like starting a new appeal. But that's generally what happens, is that someone from the county will reach out to you and offer to do a reassessment. And a lot of the disputes are resolved at that phase, because if the county can clearly see that if you're able to document your child's need, they save resources by not going to appeal in situations where they're likely to lose. So hopefully you can get that resolved at a reassessment. That's not to say you definitely can. Sometimes they put their foot down and they don't want to argue about it, but there is a chance of getting that resolved with a reassessment.
Right. And Donna did share a link because, it definitely gets complicated, but check out the article, which is all about appeals. You hope you never have to know the information, and hopefully you won't, but unfortunately a lot of parents do. So it's good to know what your options are. And like Lisa said, that aid paid pending is really important. It's kind of like a stay put and IEP,
Yeah.
right? You want to make sure you keep getting paid while you're figuring it out. So that 10 days is really important. And sometimes you get the letter, and by the time you're getting it saying you have 10 days, you might have 2 days. So, I know families have had to like turn around and like overnight FedEx something, or if fax is an option, like something. But
you can do it online too. You can appeal
every
online.
county.
There's a state website for appeals.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
And that information should be in the appeal packet.
Yeah. It's not a letter you want to sit on, because
No.
we all have those piles.
No.
I'll get to it. So that's the most important thing to remember, right? And I know we're over time, but we really wanted to, we need to cover and want to cover what we talked about at the beginning of our chat. So, which is the IHSS Career Pathways Program, right? So this is an opportunity for all providers, again, including parent providers, to get paid for completing training modules. And this is an opportunity that's been extended through the end of 2024. And if you can take advantage of it, it's a great way to grow your knowledge and get paid for it. So as I said earlier, there are families that we work with who've made thousands of dollars participating in their own professional development, which is pretty incredible. So some trainings are asynchronous, others are virtual with an instructor, and yet others are in person. And they also fill up very quickly. So Lisa, what are the most important tips that parents need to know about finding and registering for IHSS Career Pathways classes?
Okay, so the first thing is word travels quickly. So, there are whole Facebook groups dedicated to like alerting people to when different providers have opened up classes. So basically what happens is there are a bunch of different counties who have a designated provider for these career pathway classes, and you do not have to reside in that county to take their classes. You can take classes from any county, and most of the classes are virtual. They're on Zoom. And so you just have to kind of keep a list of all the different county providers that they contract with, and when they open their classes. Word travels very, very quickly. And like sometimes like the website won't work in the first 10 minutes because everybody's trying to register. There are a few providers that are bigger and have more classes. Like Homebridge has a ton of classes, and they also have a ton of asynchronous classes that you can do on your own pace. And Center for Advanced Caregiving also has classes that are like 3-4 hours long. They're all really good classes, and there's kind of quirks of each provider, each vendor, but they all fill up very quickly. So keep an eye on our Undivided Facebook group page, or join one of the variety of IHSS Facebook groups, especially the ones that are dedicated to the Career Pathways program, because people will post when something is open. So that everybody can kind of, a feeding frenzy. Everybody kind of
Like a
jumps
Taylor
in.
Swift concert. These
Yeah,
classes are like a Taylor Swift
it's
concert.
like the old days with Ticketmaster, where like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, well, I guess it's still like that too. But I remember when you had to like line up and like, or call, and yeah, it's very much like tickets, except it's
Yeah.
IHSS classes.
Yeah.
So sign up as soon as you hear about the class opening. Don't say I'll do this in a couple days, because the classes will fill up. Keep your IHSS provider number handy. I have it. I have an iPhone, so I put it as like a keyboard shortcut, because you will need it for certain vendors. You'll need it for every class you sign up for. And others, like, you just put it in your account and this there, but it helps if you don't have to go looking for it. So I just put like hashtag IHSSPN. And so every time I write that, which I'm unlikely to write on any other occasion, it spits out my provider number so that I don't have to go looking for it or memorize it. And that really helps. So keep that handy because you will need it. And keep track of the classes that you take and hold on. They're going to send you a certificate after every class. I take screenshots and keep those in a folder on my phone, because every once in a while, after you submit your hours, and there's in our article, there's like a little tutorial on how to submit your hours, so that you get paid for these trainings. And every once in a while, you'll get one declined, and they'll say, "Oh, we don't have a record of your attendance." You write back to them, and you include your IHSS provider number and a copy of the certificate from that, and that resolves the issue because you have the certificate that proves that you attended that class. And yeah, the other thing that I want to let people know about is the incentive program, because it's you get paid for training time. So the time that you're in your classes, and that includes overtime. So if you're over 40 hours a week, you will get paid the overtime rate for those classes. There's also several incentives for participating in this program. So do we have time if I just kind of explain what the incentives are?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's incentives number 1, 2, and 3. Incentive number 1 is taking, so the IHSS, like the career pathways program, is divided into different pathways. So one of them is the generalized pathway, which is general health and safety, and then adult education. And the other one is specialized pathways. So there's a few different ones. The two main ones that people are taking are cognitive and behavioral deficits and complex health needs. So incentive number 1 is you take 15 hours of any one single pathway. So all the classes in the same path. It's kind of like a little mini major, right? Take 15 hours in the same pathway, and then you submit for your training time incentive. That's $500. You get $500 just for, in addition to the payment for the time you spent, you get $500 incentive to complete 15 hours. You can do incentive number 1 twice. So that's $1,000 just for taking 30 hours of classes that are going to help you in caring for your child. Incentive number 2 is you take 15 hours of classes in one of the specialized pathways, and then provide work over a period of 30 days, at least 40 hours for a recipient who needs those services in that pathway. So they haven't really articulated how they differentiate, but my understanding and my speculation, that is just speculation, is that if your recipient has protective supervision, that's going to qualify them for the cognitive behavioral and behavioral impairments pathway. Right? So if your child has protective supervision, you want to take classes in that pathway. And then if your child has complex health needs, I would think that if there's physical assistance like ambulation, if there's like transfer, if there's assistance with bathing, if there's paramedical services, then you're looking at complex health needs and you want to take classes in that category. Once you take the 15 hours in that specialized pathway and you've submitted all those hours, you have 30 days of working at least 40 hours a month, and then that's another $500. Incentive number 3 starts as soon as the 30 days are over from incentive number 2. And it's you can use the same 15 hours that you did for the previous specialized pathways. You take those 15 hours of specialized pathways, you work 30 days, that's incentive number 2. You work 6 months, averaging 40 hours, or for at least 40 hours, not average, but at least 40 hours minimum each of those 6 months. That's $2,000. That's the incentive bonus for working for 6 months for a recipient who needs those specialized pathway skills for 6 months, and you get $2,000. So it's really, and these classes are really, really helpful. Like there are classes that they offer on autism. There's classes that they offer on physical assistance, and there's a lot of classes on caregiver burnout, which is so important. And there's
What
also
are you talking about? Who never heard of that?
like there's classes on, kind of like emotional regulation and like caring for a family member. And there's classes on Alzheimer's, which I personally found helpful because my mother-in-law was dealing with Alzheimer's. At the same time, I'm providing care for my child, but also my mother-in-law lives with us who has Alzheimer's. And these classes were really helpful for me in understanding, being part of the team of family members and caregivers who were caring for her. So there's really valuable classes, and it's totally worth, like, intellectually and emotionally and also financially worth looking into this program because it's really helpful. So I really encourage you to participate if you can.
Yeah. And as a point of clarification, do the training hours count against your maximum allowed hours
No.
caring for your recipient?
No, they don't. They don't come out of your recipient's hours, so they don't get deducted from your recipient's hours, and they do not. You will not get a violation if you've worked all your hours for your recipient and then you go overtime with the training classes. You will get a violation if your total training time and IHSS worked hours exceed 24 hours in a day. So there's some tricky areas where some of the self-paced classes you get 3 hours of credit for them, but like a lot of people don't take the full 3 hours. I mean, they're like, you go at your own pace, but you get the 3 hours credit. If if it takes you an hour and a half or 2 hours, you're still going to get the 3 hours. But if you claim 12 hours that you worked for your child, and then you claim like 15 hours of training time, they're going to know something's up. Like, they know you didn't do that.
Right.
So, pace yourself and leave yourself time to actually do those classes. Don't sign up for classes at a time when you know that your child is likely to need a lot of support, because you do need to pay attention and participate. If you do not live with your recipient, if you're caring for somebody that you don't live with, you cannot be on the clock for IHSS and also be taking classes at the same time. This doesn't come up as much for parents because when are we not providing care to our children? But, if you're at home during the day while your child's at school, that's a really good time to sign up for classes.
Right.
Or, while they're taking a nap or something, or like do asynchronous classes while they're napping or something like that. Just kind of schedule them at times where you'll be able to participate.
Absolutely. And I mean, I see there's a couple questions that unfortunately we're not going to have time to get to, but I want you to know that Lisa, after we talk, she'll go in the next couple days and look at the chat. So if there's questions that have come up that we haven't answered, then, she's really active in that chat, and she'll definitely let you know if we can answer that,
Yeah,
or give you
I'll
a
hop in and
resource
try to
that
answer
helps.
some of those questions.
Exactly. What did you say, Lisa? I'm sorry.
I said I'll hop in and try to answer some of those
Yes,
questions. So keep the
absolutely.
questions coming.
And I mean, I know we could ask
I
questions
could go on about
to
this all
Lisa for
day, really.
days, right? Like we could spend her all day. And I know we covered a lot today. So the most important thing we want you to know is that no matter where you are in the process, whether you're thinking about applying or you're years in struggling to register for a Pathways class, we can support you with every stage of need. And Donna shared lots of articles today that can get you started, but if you want or need more than articles, our Undivided navigators are ready to create a plan just for you. And you can receive that plan during a free Kickstart where your navigator will learn about your family's priorities and create a roadmap with you and for you. So Donna will share the Kickstart link again so you can learn how our navigators can support you exactly where you are. And regarding the Career Pathways program specifically, we want to ensure that our families know when new classes are released and how they can register. Lisa mentioned all of these Facebook groups and all these, it's a lot, right? So if you're not somebody who, has the bandwidth or the time to be on all these different things, right? Getting ready for that Taylor Swift concert, then you have 1 year, right, to take advantage of this program. And we want you to make the most of this opportunity. So we're kicking off the new year with a private event for our members in mid-January with Lisa. She's going to be recording a training with step-by-step instructions on how to enroll in various classes, as well as what to expect. So which again is not always as easy as you think it will be. So this will be accompanied by our step-by-step guide and what I'm calling unofficially, but our big, amazing Career Pathways FAQ, which is going to feature dozens and dozens of the most common and uncommon questions that we receive from families about these classes every day. So our navigators and benefits specialists have been answering hundreds of questions from parents. You don't need to spend hours searching for the answers. We've done the work for you, and we're assembling those into an easy reference sheet. And it's all stored right in your Undivided account, accessible with the click of a button. And then Lisa's going to hold an office hours in mid-January where parents can ask her any and all questions about the Pathways program. So we want you to optimize every opportunity to support your child and yourself. So whether that be with IHSS, IEPs, regional center, Medi-Cal, or even filing out-of-network insurance claims, just please reach out. Our navigators would love to meet you and hear about how we can support your family. We have lots of exciting things brewing for 2024, and we're going to share details as soon as they finalize. And until then, please stay connected with us. Join our Parents Only Facebook group. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, all the fun places. So thank you again to Lisa, to all of you. We know how busy you are. Our mission is to support you so your children can thrive, and we want you to thrive too. So from everyone at Undivided, we wish you an amazing holiday season. We'll see you soon.